citizenship. Whereas these kinds of issues need to be reinterpreted in the concept of a nation state. We now have nation states, we now have citizenships. One's citizenship isn't contingent in most cases in the West. West it isn't considered at all, but in most countries around the world where there is citizenship, it isn't contingent on the kind of religion you are. If you suddenly stop being Christian, you convert to Islam, you convert to Judaism, you don't suddenly lose your citizenship. In other words, the government is indifferent to what your religious affiliation is. In other words, your religious affiliation has no relationship to your loyalty, and your loyalty is dictated through your citizenship. So from that point of view, certain aspects of the Quran will need to be reapproached given that the context has changed. And this is one of the things that also had to be taken into account in the case of the attempts to reform within inside the Ottoman Empire, when they tried to create a single set of codified laws, when they had to take into account the idea of raising a professional army. Have an army of standing soldiers that were professional rather than basically a conscription-based army, of which basically is alluded to within inside the Quran and within inside various hadiths. When we talk about economics, for example, Muhammad is known as a very honest businessman. So you could argue that from that point of view, when it comes to economics, about if you're a businessman, to be able to be upfront, honest, that you shouldn't sell people products that are broken, that are unsafe and things like that. So from that point of view, I don't see anything bad from that point of view. Rule of law, same situation. Although, like I said, there is a certain context which needs to be understood. Now, in regards to the punishment between the Quran and the Bible, when you look at, for example, the Bible, you also have the Talmud. The Talmud includes lots of discussion between various sages and so forth about certain particular prescribed punishments and so forth. And it's not as simple as just saying, if you do that, this is the end result. You tend to find that there are arguments about mitigating circumstances and things like that. And Abu al-Fadl made an interesting note in the MIT lecture where he was talking about Sharia law, and he was talking about what you saw within inside the Salafi movement was a reductionist approach, whereby it took the nuance out of it. For example, the idea was that, here's a prime example: fornication. Fornication within inside traditional jurisprudence requires at least 4 people to actually see the act itself. Now, when I mean see the act, not just simply a man and a woman, or a man and a man, or a woman underneath the covers. No, they've physically actually got to see a set of genitals insert into another set of genitals. In other words, they've actually got to see the act taking place. They can't just simply say, well, I saw them under the cover and, 2 plus 2 and, that kind of stuff. No, they've actually got to see it. These are the kinds of, from that point of view, there tend to be, if you look at from that point of view, there tends to be you could say, a benefit of the doubt approach. There's also seems to be approach within inside, specifically within inside, when it talks about the idea of homosexuality, is that the concern is more about ensuring that, not necessarily that the things don't exist within inside society. I don't think when you talk with the architects of Sharia law, the jurisprudence, that they're dumb enough to think that these things could be completely stamped out. But the idea that they shouldn't be, they shouldn't spill out into the streets, in other words, and gain, in other words, these kinds of things are normalised. That, for example, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, Bob and Fred live together in their house, and they happen to be a gay couple. Now, a person, for example, a judge in that situation could argue that yes, homosexuality is a sin, and technically speaking, we could, these, I think 40 lashings or what have you, but the mitigating circumstances are those two people, they live by themselves, they mind their own business, they don't cause any problems, they're quiet, you don't know what's happening, so we just let them be. And this was the kind of, unfortunately, what you end up seeing is you end up having a lot of these problems, unfortunately, of certain minority groups that end up becoming the whipping horse when we have people who try to equate, for example, the Western civilization, science, and all these kinds of stuff, and conflate with other, the fact that, for example, homosexuality is decriminalised within inside the West. They then try to conflate, Western imperial aggression, quote unquote, with the fact that homosexuality is decriminalised in the West, and therefore it's seen as some sort of perverted element that's trying to leak into society. It's almost like, for example, the argument the communists within the Soviet Union would have that it was bourgeois decadence trying to come into this proletariat paradise. I mean, it becomes basically a whipping horse and the embodiment of the ultimate evil, the ultimate un-Islamic thing that could possibly get into society via the back door. But there was an inherent flexibility within it. As long as people mind their own business, it was kept, you could say, quote unquote, on the down low, and it wasn't something that spilled out on the streets. It wasn't something that you had, for example, like in the case of Iran or the case of Saudi Arabia, people going around peering in people's houses and interfering in what people do in their private lives. It only becomes an issue when it starts getting out to the public forum, which, in all due respects, in the case of what we have in New Zealand and most other Western countries, if you're a person, you're in public toilets trying to, pick up people, you're having sex in public places, guess what? You're going to get punished too. Obviously not 40 lashings, but you're going to get punished. So even there are limitations within Western society in regards to what society's willing to tolerate. It reminds me very much of the New Zealand Broadcasting Standards Authority, whereby the broadcasting standards are based on what society considers acceptable. In other words, which is quite funny because in the case in New Zealand, you'll have, for example, swearing during from 7 to 7:30, but things that are violent or grotesque or things like that will be put, or overtly sexual in nature will be pushed further back. So you see those kinds of things that actually develop. But from the point of the Bible and the Quran, I don't think there was ever this delusion that somehow you could deliver a utopian paradise. What we end up having is it seems to be almost like a modern thing that's come into many religious movements, that somehow they can deliver a utopian society. They have this utopian vision, and they treat the Quran and the Sunnah and so forth as if it was some sort of blueprint for the perfect society. And I don't even think Muhammad deluded himself in believing that somehow he could deliver this perfect society. But unfortunately, we've had people who have reinvented history to try to make out that somehow there was this perfect society at one point and Muhammad achieved it, and that all you have to do is just follow these series of blueprints and somehow this perfect society is going to descend out of heaven for no reason. It's just going to descend out of good luck, ignoring the fact that people are fallible, they make mistakes, they do stupid things. Moving on to just probably the final topic. I know I haven't hit 30 minutes, I thought I would, but oh well. The final thing when I was talking about, for example, many of these wowsers, whingers and complainers, I see Muslims on the internet, and they talk about, for example, the West and how permissive it is. Let's not try to delude ourselves that as a society, we are happy with, as a society, the Western society, I know it sounds pretty crappy, me speaking on behalf of Western society, but Western society is happy with, for example, marriages that break down, people, spouses that cheat on one another, people who break agreements. At the end of the day, what you see on TV and what actually happens in reality are two different things. This is the one thing that annoys me when I see Muslims, so many Muslims whose only exposure to the West is simply what they see on TV, and they think because they wear a pair of jeans and a t-shirt